Day. So as you know, some of these Donald Trump coronavirus press conferences have certainly been a spectacle. There's no question about that. And, people have attacked reporters thinking that they're going after the president. And on the other side of things, people have gone after some networks for siding with the president and maybe kissing his ass, for lack of a better term. But I think it goes both ways, and I think it's a fair conversation to have. The guy we have with us on the line right now, he works for the network OAN. His name is Jack Posobiec. And, Jack, I appreciate you taking some time to join us, my friend. How are you?
Hey, appreciate being on. Good to be here.
Sure. All right. So I guess the first question is, give me a little bit of background on OAN. How long have you guys been around for? And just give me a little bit of history on your network and how long you've been there, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So One American News has been around for about 5 years. So obviously longer than the Trump era. It certainly predated that, and has existed primarily based out of San Diego, but then we've got offices on the East Coast as well here in Washington. That's where I'm out of. And then it's sort of positioned as definitely conservative in terms of the viewpoint of the opinions, but it's actually for about 21 hours of the day, just straight hard news, no panels, old school style with news packages, and really not a lot of opinion or editorializing.
Gotcha. Now, listen, there are some people out there that, support certain conspiracy theories. It happens on the left. It happens on the right. Certainly, I'm not trying to single you out on that. But is it true that you supported the Pizzagate Hillary Clinton conspiracy theory? And are you on the record of saying, no, I was wrong, I should not have supported that?
Yeah, no, that's actually something that Megyn Kelly made up as a smear for me. What she did was she took my video and played it with the audio off and put words in my mouth after she got sort of left from Fox and then canned from NBC for, lack of talent. And really, that's not something that I've ever believed in, and regardless of what Megyn Kelly might tell you.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And listen, like I said, there's a lot of reporters on the left that are going after conspiracy theories as well. So, but I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, funny enough, I'm actually if anything, my role is usually to sort of flatten the curve on those types of things. Like, for example, I've exposed the QAnon hoax. I've gone after the Russiagate collusion truthers, and I'm probably one of the only guys in America that thinks Jeffrey Epsteine did kill himself.
Sure. You know what? And I appreciate that. And I certainly don't want you to speak for others. And if you can have your opinion, I would appreciate that. But, I know that, listen, like I said, CNN, MSNBC, sure, there are times where they ask questions that may be a little bit over the top. No question. But one of your reporters in the White House press briefing room tried to make a comparison between the coronavirus to abortion. And when I heard that question, I was like, what does abortion have to do with the coronavirus? As a veteran like yourself who's been doing this for a long time, and as you said, even keel, what do you think of that somebody at ONN would ask a question like that?
Well, again, I can't speak to, that person's thoughts or that person's intentions, but I do know that there's a lot of viewers at One American News. There's certainly a lot of conservatives that watch us and that do skew towards the pro-life demographic. And so I think that talking about pro-life issues and interviewing pro-life candidates as well as organizations is a big part of what we do.
Yeah, and listen, I have no problem with that. But the only reason why I'm asking the question is, listen, if you were doing it outside of the White House or outside of a coronavirus press conference, I wouldn't be asking you that question. And like I said, I know you didn't ask that question, but can you understand at least why some people might have a problem during a coronavirus press conference about bringing up abortion?
Yeah, I don't know if I personally in that situation would have answered the question or asked the question that way. For me, obviously, and funny enough, I was actually one of the early people to call for a travel ban on China for this, sort of stop those flights for shutting down. My background is actually in China studies. I'm a Mandarin linguist. I focus on China for the intelligence community. And when I saw what was coming out of Wuhan and when I saw what China was doing, and it's really a system blinking red kind of moment because the Chinese government doesn't usually admit fault, right?
Right. No, listen, we are
more interested in reputation and face. And so I knew that if they were dealing with something that was that contagious and was that big of a problem, then that thing was going to be spreading really fast.
Listen, Jack, we are on the same page when it comes to that, 150%. I wanted to ask you a little bit about China. Donald Trump says that he doesn't think this was done intentionally, but that the government hid it under the rug, which obviously they did, right? So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you think happened out there? Do you think this was done on purpose based on what we know, or do you agree with the president that this was something accidental and then they tried to cover it up, and because of that, lives were lost across the world?
Yeah, I don't know if I personally in that situation would have answered the question that way. For me, obviously, Yeah, I think regardless of whether or not this was something that I guess the question is really the lab, right? Did this leak out of the lab through an accident, or did it just sort of mutate naturally and arise from the wet market? The jury is still out on that, right? I don't have any specific evidence on one way or the other on that. But what I can say is that I don't think there's evidence of this being a deliberate attack or a deliberate spread. Because remember, as I just talked about, they were the ones who were hit with this thing first. So they were the ones who lost billions of dollars in an economic turndown. They lost literally untold amounts of lives because we don't know. We can't trust their numbers. They were the ones who had to shut down their cities and take on that massive reputational damage. And so to those people that might believe this was something deliberate, I would ask, what kind of person would put themselves through that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the thought process of the lab being the only biosafety level 4 lab in the entire 1.3 billion person country of China, and it just showing up at that wet market a mile away, that seems very coincidental to me. So Germany actually presented China with a $150 billion bill, and Trump made a statement after that said, our bill will be a lot larger than that. What kind of a number do you think that the United States will ask for in financial reparations from China when it's all said and done?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it really depends on what they're going to look at it in terms of just the lost trade, or in terms as well as the lives we've lost, the cultural capital we've lost in terms of our elders and those who have been at risk in terms of this. And so I don't have any numbers specifically that I've heard from the White House, but what I have heard is that they're looking at all options. Peter Navarro is in there talking about tariffs every day, and there are really people talking about manufacturing. And so bottom line, I don't personally think that China is actually going to be, cutting checks for us. But what I think that will happen is that a lot of companies are going to be looking at their supply chains now and saying, you know what, we need to diversify. We can't have all of our eggs in one basket. We need to bring stuff back to America, which is, of course, part of the president's agenda. That's always been part of his agenda. And I think there's also a lot of companies that are looking at places like Vietnam, like India, and whether or not they might be better players. So at least you have more of a diversification in terms of your decentralization, in terms of your supply chain.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Jack Posobiec, OAN, nice enough to take some time to join us today. So Jack, I've gotten into certain – listen, I'm not a Trump guy, and I'm not a journalist. I'm an opinionated talk show host, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big Trump supporter for a lot of different reasons. We don't need to go into that. But, I get into debates – yeah, absolutely. I get into some debates with some people on the right sometime, and sometimes you get some conspiracy theorists out there. So OAN's chief White House correspondent endorsed what I believe to be a conspiracy theory that Anthony Fauci not just funded the creation of the coronavirus, but to destroy the Trump economy. And again, I'm not trying to get you to speak for them, but you don't strike me as a guy that would believe that. Am I wrong?
Well, we do know that Fauci and through the NIH had essentially a grant program that was going on that was funding research around the world in terms of epidemiological research. So looking at places where different viruses might arise. Obviously, traditionally, China has been a source of those. And so it turns out that one of the, I think, sub-grantees is the word for it, ended up actually being that lab. So I don't know if it fits all together as Fauci directly donated to them. However, that it's a cold hard fact that that lab was funded as part of this program. And I would turn around and say, look, if they have a fiduciary responsibility to the United States, then we should absolutely be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, let us in, let us see what our money was going towards.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you. I don't have a problem with that. Well, I guess where I have the problem is making a correlation without enough evidence to say that Anthony Fauci funded the creation of the coronavirus to destroy the Trump economy. Again, we're not talking about an intern for OAN. We're not talking about somebody that, just got their foot in the door. We're talking about the OAN chief White House correspondent. I believe if something like that was done from, say, Jim Acosta, you guys would be all over that because you'd say, it's irresponsible journalism. You don't have enough proof. I don't disagree with, by the way, with what you just said. But you understand where I'm kind of going with this, Jack? I think it's very dangerous in any form of media, the left or the right, to take it to that stretch and basically say that Anthony Fauci is a murderer. Because, really, that's what your OAN chief White House correspondent is endorsing.
And I completely understand your position.
Okay, fair enough. We'll move on. Have you been in any of those coronavirus press briefings yourself?
No, not me personally.
Are you the type of guy that where you want to be there? Because I'll be honest with you, I would like to hear you ask some questions. You sound like a pretty smart guy, and I appreciate your perspective and answering these questions. Is that something that you've ever wanted to do, or you kind of want to stay out of there?
I'm so happy with what I do right now. I do have communications with the White House. A lot of it is, more on the behind-the-scenes level. More of it is on the working level. And
Sure.
I'm able to get stories and get scoops out that in ways that don't require necessarily people to go on the record, people to be named. Sure. I can get ahead of the curve on a lot of different things. And so I know that there's this perception that One American News is too close to the White House. And we certainly are close to the White House, no question about that. But right. I would also point out that does give us an earlier read on a lot of these things than a lot of other people.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about, in general, some other networks out there. Donald Trump likes to call certain members of the media, certain networks, fake news. Do you agree with his position on that? And do you agree with the way he holds some of these press conferences in attacking reporters, attacking their credibility? For example, if somebody, asked him a question about testing, or if some, a lot of Republicans like to call it gotcha questions. And I'm sure there's a few examples out there where you could make that claim. But do you think as a whole, the media is the enemy of the people? And do you agree with the way Donald Trump handles some of these questions?
Well, it's a very compound question there. But what I would say is, number one, I think testing, I really just think that the numbers that we have on testing are, regardless of where they're coming from, I don't think they're good numbers. I think we've all kind of understood that at this point, and nobody's really saying the quiet part loud, that we don't really have a handle on this thing. And that's not on necessarily any one person. It's just because this thing's coronavirus is so contagious and it spreads so quickly because of the asymptomatic period, it was able to get around our systems. And that's just a fact, right? That's just a fact. And other Western countries are having similar situations as well. So it's kind of hard to say that I've seen some people say, it was all on Trump's fault. But, even Germany's having issues. The UK's having massive issues. They're the number one ground zero for Europe right now. So, it's a huge issue. That being said, as far as when he calls out the media, the way I would put it is that disinformation is the enemy of the people. And so when you're taking the president's words and spinning them out of context, which admittedly isn't hard to do because he talks so much that you can always pull little snippets out here and there and make him sound like he said whatever you want him to say. I think that actually does a disservice not just to the viewers of people that are hearing that, but it also does a disservice writ large because, look, we're all in this situation together, right? I don't know that the coronavirus discerns between party members or looks at who you voted for in 2016, right? It's going to affect all of us, and it's going to affect all of our families. I know it certainly affected mine.
Sure.
And definitely a time where I would hope that everybody is trying to step up their game and just trying to get the facts, find out what's going on, instead of, playing these games.
Can you give me, and I'm sure you have some examples, can you give me an example so people can really understand where you're coming from? An example where you think a member of the media twisted Donald Trump's words in a press conference and used it as just a situation where maybe they just wanted to make it about them. Can you, in perspective, exactly what you're talking about, just to give our listeners, an example, if you can?
So the easiest one I could think of most recently is the ingesting Clorox thing. I mean, he never said that. He literally never said it, right? He was talking about admittedly, it was an experimental procedure involving UV light, right? It was involving UV light. And he did not properly use some of the terminology, right? He talked about injecting it, which I don't think is how many people would think about it. It's intubating.
Right.
You're intubating, but I can understand how he might think, intubating and injection are, kind of similar, right? Something going inside you. And the fact that they were able to mishmash his words together to make it sound like, and sure, we all saw the funny memes about Clorox and bleach and everything, but the fact of the matter is that he didn't actually say that.
You are correct.
Convoluted into something massively larger.
You are correct, and I don't disagree with you, and that's very fair. Let's see if we can make some common ground here. Would it be fair to say that the president probably shouldn't have had that dialogue to begin with? Because that's what it was. It was a dialogue. Let's be honest. He wasn't being sarcastic. He had a conversation with the doctors there. And because he did that, there are some idiots out there in the world, as I'm sure you would agree, some of whom, think that injecting yourself with Lysol is going to save your life. So while I completely agree with you, he didn't directly say it. He did bring it up, and there are a lot of idiots out there. So can we both agree that maybe it wasn't the smartest decision for the president to bring that up in the first place?
Well, I think what they're doing now, they're taking a new tack at the White House and kind of morphing into these, I guess, a more traditional press setting where you have long-form interviews that he's doing. He did a big town hall recently on Sunday night that got a lot of ratings. Unfortunately, it wasn't on our network. Maybe we'll get the next one. And then bringing Kayleigh McEnany on. Kayleigh's somebody that I actually got to know pretty well on the campaign trail. There's nobody who works harder than her, and I can absolutely say that with 100% accuracy, that she really does put in an incredible amount of hours, even with a little kid. And I think that with her being there and getting the communications and messaging on point, it's going to be a sea change in terms of those meetings.
And I hope you're right about that. I'll take your word on that. Can you explain to us why they haven't had press conferences with for months, right? For months they haven't had, and I'm not talking about, obviously, coronavirus press conference. I'm talking about the press briefings with the press secretary. I mean, have they given you guys explanations on why it's taken them so long to have one?
Well, from what I know, just talking to my own sources in the White House, they were being seen as ineffective, and they were being seen as not valuable, right? Because if you're walking into a situation where your words are going to be twisted, these negative narratives are going to keep coming up, you're not going to be able to control the message, and there are so many other ways available to them right now in order to get their message across. I mean, let's face it, we live in a world of social media, right?
Right.
The power of the press and the press briefing writ large isn't quite what it used to be, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so I think they were looking at it from a perspective of, we don't need them.
Well, yeah, and I would make the argument, Jack, that CNN and those, MSNBC, those networks have actually made a lot of money off of Donald Trump having those task force press briefings, et cetera, et cetera. I'm actually I'm a Trump supporter. I'm the Republican part of the show.
By the way, there's nobody who likes to feud better than Donald Trump, and I think we all know that.
Oh, he definitely he's a bit of a merchant of chaos in that regard. Is there? And you're with OAN. OAN is an exploding network. Obviously, Donald Trump has actually expressed favor to you guys more than Fox News in a couple situations as of recently. Is there any truth to the Trump family or Donald Trump Jr. and the Hicks family out of Dallas getting involved and investing and expanding OAN?
I honestly have no information on that other than what I've seen in the paper as well, and I can't confirm it either.
Let me ask you, just in your personal opinion, things that Donald Trump has done in the last 3.5 years, positives and negatives. Let's start with the positives. I want to get it from your perspective.
Well, I think one of the big positives that we all took a moment to think about over the past couple of weeks was North Korea, right? And it wasn't really that long ago where North Korea seemed like this massive looming threat to our country. You remember that? The nuclear testing, the long-range missiles, the shooting missiles over Japan, into the Sea of Japan. I mean, looking at like they were really rattling the sabers against South Korea. And even Barack Obama, when he left office, one of the things that he told to Trump as he was coming in, he said, North Korea is my number one issue. This is the number one thing that keeps me up at night that I'd like you to work on. And you got to give him credit where it's due. Trump, prior to all of this, made North Korea his number one priority. And we've seen progress there in a way that we haven't seen. I say this as an East Asia analyst. We haven't seen that type of progress there in a generation, in an absolute generation. And I think that when there was that question about Kim Jong-un, whether he was sick or he just had a surgery that didn't go well, that we were very worried, collectively worried, that we might go back to the situation that we used to be in where North Korea became a threat, whether it's, his sister is able to take power or some hardline general or something. And so realizing that, the status quo of North Korea actually isn't that bad. And you got to give Donald Trump credit for that because that really was all him.
What would you say as far as what has been his biggest downfall in the last 3.5 years and things that you think he needs to do to improve as a president?
The lack of an infrastructure bill. I think that working on American infrastructure and the amount of jobs that it would create for Americans, certainly is going to be something coming out of this as we talk about reopening the economy, is something that is going to be on everyone's mind. And look, in the first term, they decided to go for tax cuts. They tried to go for Obamacare. They couldn't get it. Those weren't really things that he campaigned on. He campaigned on immigration, which he's done a little bit on, but not a lot, which I would also consider something that he hasn't quite gotten there yet or hadn't quite got the ball across the finish line. The wall, is it coming? Is it not coming? I don't know. We've got 172 miles apparently, but it's certainly not the wall that I think a lot of people are expecting. And then thirdly is that infrastructure bill. That was a massive part of his campaign. Remember, he was talking about the airports. He was talking about how, they said these look like third world airports when you fly into LaGuardia. That's his words, not mine. But this idea that we do have crumbling infrastructure in the United States, that hasn't changed while he's been in office. And so I'd love to see him make that part of any sort of recovery effort. And I think that he'd have a lot of these Democrat governors behind him.
I want to talk to you about the states, the Democratic states that have been affected by this pandemic. A lot of these states were in tough financial straits before this took place, and you saw what Illinois did. They actually requested $44 billion from the federal government. I think that you'll see California, New York, and a lot of these states do the same thing. I mean, asking for a lot of money in return. And you've got Nancy Pelosi discussing about how there should be another $1 trillion that just goes to the states themselves. How do you think that Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are going to respond to these states making these outrageous requests for bailout money, so to speak?
Well, that's the biggest issue, right? And I think that's something that Mnuchin is going to pay close attention to as well as basically the executor of any of the money that goes out. Because, look, the situation is, and, I wouldn't say it's just Democrat states, right? Any state that's out there that has been in its own financial issues. We certainly know there's plenty of states that have pension crises that are coming forward. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm very familiar with Pennsylvania's pension crisis. That those states can't be using this money to fill up the problems that they've had going on before. One of the stories that I scooped, it wasn't on the states, but it was on the Kennedy Center, right, originally on this. And I got a internal phone call from the Kennedy Center president, and it's this way of thinking that, has me in this vein thinking about the states. And she was saying to her staff on this call that even before they got the money, she knew she was going to lay everybody off, and that they were going to put the money, or at least a sizable portion of the money, towards operating costs and operating shortfalls, servicing their debts, getting themselves out of their own financial mismanagement, rather than giving it to the workers, to the people that I think everybody across the board was expecting this money to go. The money's intended for them. It's not intended for you.
Sure. Right. Jack, what do you think, I want to give you the opportunity to answer this. What do you think is the biggest misconception about your network?
I think the biggest misconception is that we exist solely because of Trump, or that we exist solely because we want Trump to succeed. One American News got started during the Obama administration. I don't know if there was any real push for Trump one way or the other during the primaries. I wasn't part of the network at the time, but I'm not aware of any. And it's just been in this moment where certainly we've sort of aligned ourselves in at least on the opinion side, just being a conservative network with a conservative presidency. But this idea that, we only exist to do that, it's not true. There's actually a lot of journalism that comes out of our network. There's times where we don't see eye to eye with the president, and we're put out information that might be that the White House might not like, and the White House, this is a lot of it's coming on me actually. But what I try to do is I tell my viewers the truth. I tell my audience the truth, and whether it's something that they like, whether it's something they don't like, that's not necessarily up to me. What's up to me is to find the facts and present them so that they can make their informed decision. I'm here to present information. I'm not here to give you advice.
Well, Jack, I appreciate that about you, and I mean this as a compliment. I know you love what you do right now, but I would love to see you in that press room. I really would, because I think you would hold the president accountable, and I think you would ask great questions. It's not a cheap shot at some of your other reporters, but I really mean that as because I think you're really good at what you do, and I'm saying this for both sides of the aisle. I think there are reporters in that room on both sides of the aisle that are buffoons, for lack of a better term, and they don't ask the right questions on both sides of the aisle. And you're not one of those, and I appreciate you for that.
Name one on the other side, Brian.
I'm not going to name names because I just told you I'm not going to call out certain people. But I think there are even people that ask questions that are not relevant to the conversation. Just zero relevancy, like asking about Tiger King. That is ridiculous. That's a perfect example. I'm not going to say who it was, but I think, Jack, you know who I'm talking about. Hey, Jack, again, thank you so much for taking.
I think that guy was actually more of a conservative because he was.
He probably was. He might have been. I mean, listen, I like Tiger King.
I'm okay. You know what, man? I'm holding out for the one-on-one. You know what I'm saying?
And you know what? And you know what? I think you would do a great job, and I hope you get that one-on-one with the president. Jack Posobiec with OAN, thank you so much for your time. We'd love to have you on again sometime. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
I appreciate you guys.
All right,
thanks
there you
a lot,
go.
Jack.
I'll tell you what, I was really impressed by him. He answered the questions honestly.